The sandstorm swallowed the town until the lonely cowboy carried the sick teacher to his home. The sky had turned the color of old bone, bleached and brittle, when the sandstorm rolled over the town of Hollow Creek like a living wall. It came from the west, swallowing the horizon first, then the mesa, then the scattered ranches, until there was nothing left but churning fury and the taste of grit in every breath. The few souls still outside scrambled for cover, pulling scarves over their mouths, squinting against the sting. The schoolhouse bell clanged twice before the wind ripped the sound away. Gideon Marsh had been mending fence posts 3 miles out when he saw it coming. He was a man shaped by solitude, lean and weathered at 36 years old, with hands that knew rope and leather better than they knew gentleness. His horse, a sturdy roan named Rust, had sensed the storm before he did, stamping and tossing her head. Gideon didn't waste time. He swung into the saddle and turned toward town, knowing the storm would overtake him, but hoping to reach some shelter before the worst hit. The wind slammed into them halfway there, a roaring beast that turned day into twilight. Gideon bent low over Rust's neck, letting the horse find her way by instinct. Sand scoured his face, worked its way into his collar, his boots, the creases of his eyes. He kept moving because stopping meant being buried. When the shapes of buildings finally emerged through the chaos, he guided Rust toward the livery stable. But something made him glance toward the schoolhouse. The door was open, banging on its hinges, and through the swirling sand, he saw a figure slumped on the steps. He turned Rust toward the schoolhouse without thinking. The figure was small, dressed in a dark skirt and white blouse, now turned brown with dust. A woman. He dismounted and crouched beside her, pulling his bandana down. Her face was pale beneath the coating of sand, her breath coming in shallow gasps. He recognized her then. Eliza Brennan, the schoolteacher who had arrived in Hollow Creek 6 months ago from somewhere back east. He had seen her in town, heard her voice drifting from the schoolhouse when he rode past, but they had never spoken. "Miss Brennan," he said close to her ear so she could hear him over the wind. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with fever. "I can't," she whispered, barely audible. "I can't breathe." He didn't ask questions. He scooped her up, surprised by how light she was, and carried her to Rust. Getting her into the saddle took effort. She was limp, barely conscious, her body radiating heat, even through the layers of fabric. He climbed up behind her, pulled her back against his chest, and wrapped one arm around her waist to hold her steady. With his free hand he took the reins and urged Rust forward into the maelstrom. His cabin was north of town, set back against a ridge that offered some protection from the wind. It took longer than it should have to reach it, the world reduced to a few feet of visibility and the feel of Rust's muscles moving beneath him. When the dark shape of the cabin finally appeared, he felt a surge of relief so strong it surprised him. He half-carried, half-dragged Eliza inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The sudden absence of wind was startling, replaced by the muffled howl outside and the creaking of the cabin's timbers. He laid her on his bed, the only one in the single room, and lit the oil lamp with fingers that shook slightly from cold and exertion. In the lamplight, he could see her more clearly. She was younger than he had thought, maybe 26, with dark hair plastered to her forehead and cheeks flushed with fever. Her breathing was labored, each inhale a visible effort. He touched her forehead and pulled his hand back at the heat. Gideon had tended sick cattle, set broken bones on horses, even stitched up his own leg once after a bad fall. But a fevered woman was different. He stood there for a moment, uncertain, then moved into action, because action was what he knew. He filled a basin with water from the barrel by the door, found a clean cloth, and began wiping the sand from her face and hands. She stirred under his touch, murmuring something he couldn't make out. Her skin was dry and hot, her lips cracked. He brought a cup of water to her mouth and tilted it gently. She coughed, but some of it went down. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Gideon kept vigil. He added wood to the stove, boiled water for willow bark tea that his mother had once used for fevers, and changed the cool cloth on Eliza's forehead every few minutes. The hours blurred together, marked only by the lamp's steady flame and the woman's fitful sleep. Sometime deep in the night, her eyes opened. She looked around the unfamiliar room, then at him, and panic flashed across her face. "You're safe," he said quietly, staying where he was by the stove. "Storm caught you. You were sick. I brought you here." She tried to sit up, but her arms wouldn't hold her. She sank back, confusion replacing the panic. "Where?" "My cabin, north of town. I'm Gideon Marsh." Recognition flickered. "The rancher." "Yes." He poured water into a cup and brought it to her. "You need to drink." She took the cup with trembling hands, managing a few sips before exhaustion claimed her again. She slept, and he returned to his chair by the stove, watching the play of shadows on the walls and listening to the storm's fury begin to wane. By morning, the wind had died to a whisper. Gideon stepped outside into a world transformed. Sand had drifted against the cabin walls, buried the fence posts, reshaped the land into new contours. The sky was clear and merciless, the sun already hot. He checked on Rust, who had weathered the storm in the lean-to, then returned inside. Eliza was awake, propped up on one elbow, looking around with more alertness. When he entered, she pulled the blanket higher, suddenly aware that she was in a strange man's bed, in a strange man's home. "The storm's past," Gideon said, keeping his distance. "I'll take you back to town when you're strong enough." "How long have I been here?" "Since yesterday afternoon. You had a high fever." She touched her forehead, as if checking his words. "I remember feeling ill during lessons. I dismissed the children early. Then everything became confused. You were on the schoolhouse steps when I found you." She met his eyes then, really looked at him. He was a tall man, lean from hard work, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His face was all angles and caution, but his eyes were steady. Kind, she thought, though he probably wouldn't welcome the word. "You saved my life," she said. "I couldn't leave you there. Still, thank you." He nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude, and busied himself with making coffee. She watched him move around the small space, economical and sure in his movements. The cabin was sparse but clean. A table, 2 chairs, the bed, a stove, shelves holding tins and tools. No photographs, no decorations, nothing that spoke of a life beyond survival. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. "I do. It must be lonely." "It's quiet," he said, which wasn't the same thing. She wanted to ask more, but a coughing fit seized her, harsh and deep. He was beside her instantly, helping her sit up, supporting her until it passed. When she caught her breath, there were tears in her eyes from the effort. "You need rest," he said, "and something in your stomach." He made her eat some cornbread soaked in warm milk, simple food that she managed to keep down. Then he insisted she sleep more. She was too weak to argue. As her eyes closed, she heard him moving quietly around the cabin, the domestic sounds strangely comforting. She slept through most of that day and into the next night. Each time she woke, he was there, bringing water or tea, or changing the cloth on her forehead when the fever spiked again. He didn't speak much, but his presence was steady, reliable. She found herself trusting him without quite knowing why. On the second full day, she felt strong enough to sit up properly. Gideon had stepped outside, and she took the opportunity to stand, legs shaking, and make herself more presentable. Her dress was ruined, stained and torn, but she did what she could, braiding her hair with clumsy fingers. When he came back in with fresh water, he found her sitting at the table, upright if pale. "You should be resting," he said. "I've been resting. I'm not an invalid." He almost smiled. Almost. "No, I don't suppose you are." She looked at him squarely. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Marsh. If I'm to impose on your hospitality, I should at least know my host." He poured coffee for them both, considering. "Not much to tell. I came out here 11 years ago with my wife, Sarah. We built this cabin together, started running cattle on the land west of here. And now, his jaw tightened. Sarah died 7 years ago, childbed fever. The baby too, a son. The words fell between them like stones. Eliza felt the weight of them, the old grief carried in his voice. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. He shrugged, but the gesture was tight. "Long time ago. Grief doesn't measure itself in years." He looked at her then, surprised by her understanding. "No, I suppose it doesn't." They sat in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, one that held space for shared pain. Eliza thought of her own losses, the reasons she had left Philadelphia, and wondered if Gideon could see them written on her face the way she could see his. "What brought you to Hollow Creek?" he asked after a while. "A need for a fresh start. The school board back east thought my methods too progressive. I disagreed with their assessment." "Progressive how?" "I believe girls should learn mathematics and science, not just needlework. I believe children from poor families deserve the same education as children from wealthy ones. Apparently these are radical notions." This time he did smile, a brief flash that changed his whole face. "Sounds reasonable to me." "Well, you're more enlightened than the Philadelphia School Board." Over the next few days, a rhythm developed. Eliza's strength returned slowly, and with it, her natural curiosity. She asked questions, and Gideon, to his own surprise, found himself answering. He told her about the land, the hard seasons and the good ones, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. She told him about her students, the joy of watching a child's face light up with understanding, the small rebellions she staged against ignorance. They discovered they both loved books, though Gideon's small collection ran to practical manuals and a worn copy of Whitman's poetry. Eliza had left most of her books behind, but she could recite long passages of Dickinson and Thoreau from memory. In the evenings, she would recite while he mended tack or sharpened tools, her voice filling the cabin with words that reminded him there was beauty in the world beyond work and survival. If this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with friends who love Old West stories. On the 5th day, Gideon said he would take her back to town in the morning. Eliza nodded, but something in her chest tightened at the thought. She had grown used to the cabin's quiet, to Gideon's steady presence. The outside world, with its expectations and judgments, seemed harsh by comparison. That evening, as she helped him prepare a simple supper of beans and bacon, she asked, "Do people in town talk about you?" He glanced at her. "Some." "What do they say?" "That I'm unfriendly, that I keep to myself, that I'm not right in the head since Sarah died." "And are they correct?" "About the first two, yes. About the third, I couldn't say." She set down the spoon she was holding. "I think you're one of the sanest men I've ever met. You know who you are and what you need. That's more than most people can claim." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. But later, lying on his bedroll by the stove while she slept in his bed, he thought about her words and felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of shame he hadn't known he was carrying. The morning came too soon. He hitched Rust to the small wagon he rarely used, made sure Eliza was wrapped in blankets against the cool morning air, and they set off for town. The ride took an hour, the wagon creaking over ruts and stones. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. Hollow Creek looked worse for the storm's passage. Sand was piled in the streets, several roofs had lost shingles, and the general store's sign hung crooked. People were out with shovels and brooms, reclaiming their town inch by inch. When Gideon's wagon rolled down Main Street, heads turned. By the time he pulled up in front of the boarding house where Eliza rented a room, a small crowd had gathered. Among them was Reverend Hollis, a thin man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "Miss Brennan," the Reverend said, his voice carrying, "we feared the worst when we couldn't find you after the storm. Mr. Marsh rescued me. Eliza said, climbing down from the wagon with Gideon's help. "I fell ill during the storm, and he brought me to his cabin." The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "His cabin? For how many days?" "5, Eliza said evenly. A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, looked scandalized. Martha Cole, who taught Sunday school, whispered something to the woman beside her. "I see," Reverend Hollis said, his tone heavy with implication. "And there was no chaperone, I assume?" "There was no need for one," Eliza said, her voice cooling. "Mr. Marsh was a perfect gentleman. He saved my life and asked for nothing in return. Nevertheless, appearances must be considered. A young, unmarried woman, alone with a man for 5 days. The school board will need to meet about this." Gideon, who had been standing silent beside the wagon, spoke up. "You questioning Miss Brennan's virtue, Reverend?" "I'm questioning the propriety of the situation, Mr. Marsh. She was dying of fever. Would you rather I left her to die so her virtue could remain unquestioned?" "Of course not. But surely you understand how this looks." "I understand that you'd rather let a woman die than risk gossip. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." The crowd had gone quiet, watching the confrontation with avid interest. Reverend Hollis's face reddened. "How dare you? I'm thinking of Miss Brennan's reputation." "Are you?" Eliza interjected. "Or are you thinking of your own authority? I'm grateful to Mr. Marsh. He acted with honor and compassion. If the school board takes issue with that, then perhaps Hollow Creek isn't the place for me after all." She turned and walked into the boarding house, her back straight despite her lingering weakness. Gideon watched her go, then climb back onto the wagon without another word. As he drove away, he heard the whispers starting, spreading like wildfire through dry grass. The school board met 3 days later. Eliza was called to defend herself before 5 men who looked at her with varying degrees of judgment. Reverend Hollis laid out the case. She had spent 5 unchaperoned days with a man, compromising not only her own reputation, but the moral standing of the school itself. Several parents had expressed concerns. Perhaps it would be best if Miss Brennan resigned her position. Eliza listened, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. When they finished, she spoke. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, but I will not resign. I did nothing wrong. Mr. Marsh did nothing wrong. If you dismiss me for being rescued from certain death, then you're telling every woman in this town that propriety matters more than survival. Is that really the message you want to send?" The men exchanged glances. Finally, Samuel Porter, who owned the dry goods store and had daughters in Eliza's class, cleared his throat. "My girls speak highly of you, Miss Brennan. They say you're the best teacher they've ever had." "I appreciate that, Mr. Porter. But you must see our position. This is a small town. Reputations matter." "They do, which is why I'm asking you to protect mine by acknowledging the truth. Nothing improper occurred. If you can't do that, then I will leave, but not because I'm ashamed, because this town doesn't deserve good teachers if it won't stand by them." The meeting ended without resolution. The board would deliberate and announce their decision in a week. Eliza left feeling hollow, exhausted by the need to justify her own survival. She didn't see Gideon during those days. He had retreated to his ranch, and she wondered if he regretted helping her. The thought made her chest ache. Then, on the 6th day, something unexpected happened. She was in the schoolhouse, preparing lessons even though she didn't know if she'd be allowed to teach them when she heard wagons outside. She looked up to see a procession. Samuel Porter and his wife, the Hendersons, the Johnsons, the Carters. More than a dozen families, many of them parents of her students. Mrs. Porter entered first, her face kind. "Miss Brennan, we wanted you to know that we're standing with you. We've told the board that if they dismiss you, we'll pull our children from the school until they reinstate you." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "You don't have to do that." "Yes, we do. You're a good teacher. More than that, you're a good person. What happened to you could have happened to any of us, and we'd have been grateful for the help, not scandalized by it. One by one, the families expressed their support. When they left, Eliza sat at her desk and wept, overwhelmed by the unexpected grace of human kindness. The school board met again and, faced with a potential revolt, voted to keep Eliza on. Reverend Hollis abstained, his disapproval clear, but he was outvoted. Eliza could stay. She celebrated quietly that evening in her room, but the victory felt incomplete. She realized with startling clarity that what she wanted most was to share the news with Gideon. The next day was Saturday. She borrowed a horse from the livery and rode out to his ranch, following the directions she'd coaxed from the stableman. The land was beautiful in its starkness, all gold grass and blue sky, the mountains purple in the distance. His cabin looked small and vulnerable against the vast landscape. She dismounted and knocked, her heart beating hard. When he opened the door, surprise flashed across his face. "Eliza, I hope I'm not intruding." No, of course not. Come in." Inside, the cabin looked exactly as she remembered. She felt a strange sense of homecoming, which made no sense. She'd spent 5 days here, all of them while sick, but the place had become precious to her anyway. "The school board voted to keep me," she said. Relief spread across his face. "That's good. That's right. It wouldn't have happened without the parents standing up for me, for us." She paused. "I wanted you to know, and to thank you again, not just for saving my life, but for defending me in front of the Reverend. He had no right to question you. Still, you didn't have to speak up. Many men wouldn't have." They stood facing each other in the small space, the air between them charged with things unspoken. Gideon looked at her, this woman who had brought light into his carefully constructed solitude, and felt afraid of what he was feeling. "I should get back," Eliza said finally, though she didn't move. "Stay for coffee at least. It's a long ride back." She stayed. They sat at his table, drinking coffee and talking about small things, ordinary things, but beneath the conversation ran a current of something deeper. When she finally rose to leave, Gideon walked her outside. "You could visit again," he said, awkward but earnest. "If you wanted." "I'd like that." She rode back to town as the sun began to set, the sky on fire with color, her heart feeling both full and aching. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. On Saturdays, when school was out, Eliza would ride to Gideon's ranch. Sometimes she'd bring books to share, sometimes just herself. They would talk for hours, or work side by side in companionable silence. She learned to help with small tasks, mending or cooking, and he taught her about the land, the cattle, the rhythms of a life lived close to the earth. He began to visit her in town too, always properly, taking her to church socials or walking with her after school. Hollow Creek watched with interest, the gossip shifting from scandal to speculation about courtship. Some, like Mrs. Porter, were delighted. Others, like Reverend Hollis, remained disapproving. Eliza found she didn't care. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt like herself, unguarded and unafraid. With Gideon, she could speak her mind, share her dreams, admit her fears. He listened in a way no one else ever had, as if her words mattered, as if she mattered. And Gideon, who had locked himself away from feeling for so long, found the walls crumbling. Eliza had slipped past his defenses not with force but with gentle persistence, with laughter and questions and a faith in him that he didn't quite understand, but desperately needed. One evening in late autumn, as they sat on his porch watching the stars emerge, he found the courage to speak. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he said quietly. "After Sarah, I was sure that part of me had died too." Eliza reached for his hand. "I'm not asking you to forget her, I know. That's what makes you different. You don't want me to be someone I'm not, you just want me." "I do." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not good with words, never have been, but I need you to know that you've changed everything for me. You brought me back to life. You saved my life first. Maybe we saved each other." She smiled, tears glistening. "Maybe we did." He kissed her then, tentative at first, then deeper, both of them reaching for something they thought they'd lost. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza was laughing and crying at once. "Marry me," Gideon said, the words rough but sure. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. Yes, they were married in December, a simple ceremony in the church with the whole town in attendance. Even Reverend Hollis performed the service, though stiffly. Mrs. Porter cried happy tears. Eliza's students threw rice as the newlyweds left, shouting congratulations. Eliza moved into the cabin, bringing her books and her bright spirit. She continued teaching, riding into town 3 days a week, returning to the ranch in the evenings. Gideon built her a bookshelf, then another, filling the walls with wood and love. The cabin that had been a place of solitude and grief transformed into a home filled with conversation and laughter and quiet contentment. The first year of marriage brought adjustments. Eliza learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and hard work, the way weather and season dictated everything. Gideon learned to share his space, his thoughts, his carefully guarded heart. They had their disagreements, moments when her city ways clashed with his frontier pragmatism, but they learned to talk through them, to compromise, to choose each other even when it was difficult. The second year brought joy of a different kind. Eliza discovered she was with child in the spring. Gideon was terrified, haunted by memories of Sarah's death, but Eliza was strong and healthy, and the town's new doctor, a young man fresh from medical school back east, was competent and reassuring. When their daughter was born in January, a squalling, red-faced miracle, Gideon wept openly, holding the tiny bundle with trembling hands. They named her Rose, and she was followed 2 years later by another daughter, Helen. The cabin grew more crowded, more chaotic, filled with the sounds of children and life. Gideon expanded the structure, adding rooms and a proper porch, transforming the bachelor's shelter into a family home. Eliza continued teaching for several more years, bringing her daughters with her when they were small, teaching them alongside the other children. But as the girls grew and the ranch demanded more attention, she eventually stepped back, though she never stopped educating. She tutored students in the evenings, organized a lending library in town, and made sure her own daughters received every opportunity she could provide. The years accumulated like sediment, each one adding layers to their lives. Rose grew into a serious, studious girl who loved mathematics. Helen was wild and adventurous, more comfortable on horseback than in a schoolroom. Gideon taught them both to ride, to rope, to read the land and weather. Eliza taught them to think critically, to stand up for what was right, to never settle for less than they deserved. When Rose turned 16 and Helen 14, Hollow Creek had grown into a proper town. The railroad had come through 5 years earlier, bringing prosperity and change. New businesses opened, new families arrived, and the rough frontier town slowly civilized itself. Gideon and Eliza, now in their 50s, found themselves among the town's respected elders, the couple who had weathered scandal and built something lasting. But prosperity brought its own challenges. Large cattle operations from the east began buying up land, offering prices that struggling ranchers found hard to refuse. The open range was being fenced and parceled, the old ways disappearing. Gideon resisted at first, clinging to the independence he'd built, but even he could see the writing on the wall. Then came the drought. It started gradually, the rains failing one season, then another. Wells that had never run dry began to falter. The grass turned brown and brittle. Cattle died by the dozens, then the hundreds. Gideon worked himself to exhaustion trying to save what he could, hauling water from distant sources, moving the herd to whatever sparse grazing remained. But it wasn't enough. One evening, after another day of burying dead cattle, he came home to find Eliza waiting on the porch. She had coffee ready, and they sat together in the gathering dusk, too tired for words. Finally, she spoke. "We need to talk about what comes next." "I'm not giving up," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not asking you to give up. I'm asking you to be realistic. We're not young anymore, Gideon. The girls are nearly grown. This land is killing you. It's all I have." "No." She took his hand firmly. "It's not. You have me. You have our daughters. You have a life that matters beyond this ranch." He was silent for a long time, staring out at the parched land he'd worked for so many years. "I don't know how to be anything else. Then we'll figure it out together, like we always have." The decision, when it finally came, was both difficult and liberating. They sold the ranch to a consortium from Denver, getting enough money to secure their future. With the proceeds, they bought a comfortable house in a larger town 50 miles south, where Rose was attending the new teachers' college and Helen was dreaming of bigger horizons. The day they left was bright and clear, the kind of day that had once meant hope for rain, but now just meant more heat. Gideon walked the property one last time, saying goodbye to the land he'd known for so long. He stopped at a small grove of cottonwood trees on a hill overlooking the house, where two simple markers stood side by side. Sarah and her infant son, buried nearly 3 decades ago. He knelt between the graves, running his fingers over Sarah's name, carved into the weathered wood. "I loved you," he said quietly. "I never stopped. But I found love again, and I think you'd be glad. I hope you'd be glad." Eliza found him there, understanding without words what he needed. She stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, bearing witness to his past while representing his present. "She's part of you," Eliza said softly. "I've never resented that. Your capacity to love her and lose her and still choose to love again is one of the things I admire most about you." He stood, pulling Eliza close. "I was dead for 7 years. You brought me back." "No, you chose to come back. I just gave you a reason." They walked down the hill together, leaving the graves to the prairie grass and the wind. At the wagon, their daughters waited, ready for whatever came next. Rose held the reins, responsible and steady. Helen bounced with barely contained excitement about the adventure ahead. As they pulled away, Gideon looked back one last time. The cabin stood empty, the barn doors open, the corrals vacant. But it wasn't empty, not really. It held 30 years of life, of love found and lost and found again, of a man who learned that saving someone could also mean saving yourself. In their new town, they built a different kind of life. Gideon found work consulting with other ranchers, his decades of experience valued and sought after. Eliza returned to teaching part-time at the local school, her progressive methods no longer quite so shocking in the more cosmopolitan atmosphere. Rose graduated and became a teacher herself, passionate about bringing education to rural communities. Helen, surprising everyone, became a journalist, writing about the changing West with insight and wit. The years continued their steady march. Grandchildren arrived, filling holidays with noise and joy. Gideon's hair turned white, Eliza's face lined with the beautiful map of a life fully lived. They grew old together, which was its own kind of miracle. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their daughters threw them a party. Half the town attended, along with friends from Hollow Creek who made the journey. Stories were told, toasts were made, and through it all, Gideon and Eliza sat hand in hand, marveling at the life they'd built from a single moment of compassion during a sandstorm. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, they sat on their porch in comfortable silence. The air was cool and sweet, so different from the harsh frontier they'd left behind. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked. "Leaving the ranch?" Gideon considered, as he always did before speaking. "I regret that the land couldn't sustain us anymore. But leaving? No. You were right. The ranch was where we built our life, but it wasn't our life. This is." Oti, He gestured to encompass not just the house, but everything it represented, their daughters, their grandchildren, their continued purpose and connection. "I used to think love was about finding the right person," Eliza said, "but it's really about becoming the right person, with someone who's willing to grow alongside you." "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just took a while to notice." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "That's fair." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had traveled an unlikely road together, a lonely cowboy and a sick teacher, brought together by a sandstorm and held together by choice, day after day, year after year. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something real. The sandstorm had swallowed the town that day long ago, but what emerged from the chaos was unexpected grace. Not rescue alone, but redemption. Not just survival, but transformation. Two wounded souls who chose to heal together, who built not just a life, but a legacy of love that would outlive them both. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Not the storm, but what came after. Not the saving, but the choosing, again and again, through every season and every change, until the very end. This story is a work of fiction created for inspiration and entertainment. None of the events or characters depicted are real, and no offense is intended to anyone. If you enjoyed this tale of love and resilience in the Old West, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share it with others who appreciate stories of courage, redemption, and second chances. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this community. Your support means everything, and we look forward to bringing you more stories that touch the heart.